Good evening. I'm DaVida Alston, and thank you for joining me today for the Embracing Change webinar series hosted by National Geographic Learning in the GCC region. Education is ever evolving, and at National Geographic Learning, we are poised to provide a professional learning community for practitioners in the field of education, which is grounded in research-based pedagogy, current trends in education, and meets the demands of ever-changing classrooms. And wow, over the last year, let's just think about how classrooms have changed from more traditional classroom settings to online learning and hybrid settings or blended model. So of course, over the Embracing Change series, we will go on a journey together through a series of sessions which are relevant for today's 21st century classrooms, meet the needs of blended learning models, and truly boast our model at National Geographic Learning of bringing the world to every classroom. You know, since many of us have been stuck at home over the last few months, I thought it would be wonderful to take a virtual road trip together through the Embracing Change series. Let's look at our roadmap for the next month that we'll spend together. So for the first series, which is today, we'll be looking at 4C's framework and preparing students for a classroom in a global society. Then we will take flight on March the 9th, and we'll move into building independent learners, the gradual release of responsibility. Then we'll travel together virtually by boat and look at balanced literacy. And then we will end our road trip on the 23rd of March and look at inclusive practices for blended learning classroom. I'll be your tour guide throughout this journey. And just again, a little bit about myself. I'm DaVida Alston, and I'm a sales engagement consultant with National Geographic Learning. And I've been in the education field for over 25 years, serving as role as a teacher leader, supporting districts in the United States, and as a school leader in the GCC region. I truly believe in transformational education and leadership, meaning that I truly believe in building capacity among teachers, giving them sound professional development, coaching teachers, supporting teachers to make educational change and to make sure that students are learning in the classroom setting. So again, thank you for joining me. So now you know a little bit about myself. We're on this journey together. I would love to find out a little bit about you and who you are and what brings you to this session today. So let's participate in a quick poll so that I can get to know you better and understand what brings you here today on our virtual trip. So I'll start the live poll, and if you can just take 1 to 2 minutes to complete the live poll. Wonderful, and I see people already answering the first question, and it really talks to me about how many years have you been in the education field. So I see that I have teachers that are starting teachers, and then we also have teachers that are experts in the field of education and have been working in education for more than 10 years. So that's wonderful to see. And it seems like joining me, there's a robust group of teachers and educators from KG. I see some high school teachers, and it's great to see leaders. There's vice principals, and I see coordinators that have joined us. So it's great to see such a large group of educators to join our professional learning community today. And I asked the question on this poll, and I see people answer, you know, what brought you here today? And so some of you are saying, you know, to look at some best practices to use in the classroom. A few people are noting that really to look at best practices for online learning. And I know that's really an area that teachers have had to learn to make some new changes in the way they deliver instruction. So that's great to see. And I've asked, you know, about my experts in the field of 4Cs, you know, the topic that we're discussing today. And so I see people who have noted that they're an expert and some that have noted that this is a new topic for them. So I look forward for us learning together. And then I put a fun question. As I said, we're on this virtual road trip together. And so my fun question was the last one. You know, if you could travel anywhere in time, would you prefer to be in the past, in the future, or stay in the present? And I put this here because 4Cs is really grounded in that. It looks at traditional teaching practices and really looks for teachers to guide and change their method of delivery and instruction, their method of how they provide support students in their learning skills. And so this is about moving into the 21st century. How do we change our practices and teaching to meet the needs of tomorrow learners? So thank you for participating in the poll. And let's just go ahead and get started. Again, this is the 4Cs framework, preparing students. And, National Geographic learning resources, they're grounded in the research and the principles of the 4Cs framework. Our resources prepare students for a global society, by immersing them in learning, which requires them to be socially aware of the world around them. It's grounded in inquiry-based learning and, provides students with the academic language skills so that they may be successful in a global society. And that's truly everything that the 4Cs framework encompasses. And I love this quote. I love putting quotes when I'm working with teachers or educators. And one of the things that this quote says is, tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn, by Benjamin Franklin. And I just want to look at that last piece, involve me and I learn. And that's the core principles of the 4Cs framework, that students should be actively engaged and involved in their learning. They should be building skills to make them global thinkers, to make them innovators and entrepreneurs. So I felt like this quote really underpinned what we will be discussing today. So we're on a road trip, and with every road trip, you need your GPS. So let's look at our GPS for today's session. We'll be looking at developing an understanding of the 4Cs framework and how it's used as an instructional framework to prepare students for a global society. Secondly, we'll analyze kind of these learning skills and soft skills, and I'll really delve into this where we'll spend most of our time today, but those learning skills that are required to develop those 21st century learning skills. And then we'll explore some effective teaching practices for the 21st century classroom. So I just want to stop here, and when you think about the 4Cs, or what these words initially what words initially come to your mind when you think about 4Cs or why they are important. And I just want you to respond in the Q&A, and then I'll just read out some of your responses. But talk to me about, what do you think about when you hear 4Cs, and why is it important in today's education? So I'll just give you some time to put some answers, responses in the chat or in the Q&A. Wonderful. I see some people saying, build critical thinking. Oh, I love this one, to be global thinkers. Very good. I love that one. Someone said to prepare college and career readiness. It's a huge component of the 4Cs. Great. And I see words like creativity, collaboration coming up. Wonderful. Active learning. Love that one, especially while we're working online. Active learning. That's a great one. Often educators have the misconception that when we're discussing the 4Cs for education, we're merely talking about technology. But I want to charge you today that technology is only one aspect of the 4Cs. Today, we will focus on the importance of teachers using instructional practices which will develop learning skills. So they'll develop these 21st century learning skills, or what I call soft skills. It will charge students to be global and socially aware, which some of you said. Student-centered learning, so focus away from the teacher, more focus on the student, involve them, the quote that I read early. Inquiry-based learning, which many of you said in the chat, critical thinking, creativity. I saw these words come up a lot. Communication, collaboration, entrepreneurship. I saw those words. So, one of the things that I want to look at is that these skills will focus on these skills for teaching instructional practices, which develop these learning skills. And these skills prepare students to meet the demands of the ever-changing workforce. We're preparing them for career readiness, and also prepare students for college and through university success as well. So researchers and theorists, they have coined the 4Cs as the key competencies for 21st century learning. And when I say key competencies, these can be identified on the basis that they make a measurable contribution to educational attainment. They help students to build their relationships. They help students to gain employment, their overall health and well-being. So this is the whole child that we're looking at, building students so that they can be productive citizens in a global society. And when we look at this, you know, learning and innovation skills are increasingly recognized as those that distinguish students who are prepared for more complex life and work environments in the 21st century than those who are not prepared. So that's one of the importance of really focusing and making sure you're building these skills for students. Post-secondary skills, these career skills, life skills, and the digital literacy and innovation. And so this is not a new term. This actually came about in 2002, and a coalition of partnership was formed by educators, by policymakers, business leaders, and they really came together to talk about what core competencies, those key competencies, will prepare students for the 21st century learning skills. So let's just take a look, and we're going to watch a video together to really delve in the research behind this and how classrooms should be prepared to build these learning skills.
You may have heard of the 4 C's for 21st century learning: critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. But how do these skills affect your teaching practice and student learning? And how does technology play a role in building these skills? Let's take a step back. In 2002, the Partnership for 21st Century Skills, a coalition between the business community, education leaders, and policymakers, created the framework for 21st century learning. This framework presents a holistic view of 21st century teaching and learning.
Sorry about that.
In the context of core knowledge instruction, students must learn the 4 C's. These competencies are essential skills for students to thrive in work and in life. Let's take a closer look at how digital tools can help foster these skills in students. Critical thinking refers to students' abilities to analyze, interpret, evaluate, make decisions, and solve problems. For example, take a high school social studies class in which students are comparing society's use of fossil fuels in the past and in the present. In addition to online research, students can use video conferencing to conduct first-hand interviews with field experts. Students can use graphic organizers to organize and illustrate their findings, compare and contrast their data, and share with one another. Communication refers to students' ability to share information while expressing their thoughts and opinions clearly to others. Communication also requires strong listening and evaluation skills in order to aid in collaboration. It includes verbal, written, and multimedia messages. For example, consider a 5th grade class in which students are learning about forest fires in their region. A local fire chief asks a question on a community site about fire prevention efforts. Students could post short written or audio responses to the issue, thereby engaging in an online conversation. Students learn to articulate their thoughts in a clear way while gaining a sense of agency for having a voice around larger community issues. Collaboration refers to students' ability to work with others to accomplish a goal while being flexible and sharing group responsibility. For example, an 8th grade science class could work in small teams with other nearby middle school students to investigate local environmental issues. Students can assume different roles within their teams depending on their talents and interests. For instance, some can make observations, some can report data, and others can share out the results. Creativity includes abilities such as brainstorming, refining ideas, being responsive to ideas from others, and making ideas tangible and useful to others. For example, a 3rd grade class might work together to brainstorm innovative ways to address recycling. Students decide to create a recycling campaign in the school, including making a public service announcement video for an upcoming assembly. You can see from these examples that technology, when used strategically, can really enhance how you support the 4 C's in your classroom. Digital tools can help students think critically, communicate, collaborate, and be creative. And we know that these skills help foster higher order thinking, which is crucial for 21st century learning. So, what do the 4 C's look like for teaching and learning in your classroom?
So I love the video because it really just gives a holistic view of the 4 C's, why this coalition was formed, and just gives you a broader view of how critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication work together. So as we dig into this a little bit deeper and we really talk about those key learning skills, I want to first start with critical thinking. So, critical thinking is a focused and a careful analysis of a topic, thought, or an idea. And, when people speak of the left brain activity, they're usually referring to building those critical thinking skills. And it empowers students to discover the truth in their assertions, so allowing them to think, especially when it comes to separating fact and opinion, which is a skill that students start to develop as early as KG, those early years. And with critical thinking, students don't just learn a set of facts or figures. Instead, they learn how to discover the facts and figures for themselves. They ask questions. So our classroom should encompass an environment where students are allowed to ask questions. They become engaged in the world around them. And what I love about critical thinking, that they help other students to think critically too. And that may be the most important piece of this, is that when some students start to develop their critical thinking, then they share those ideas and thoughts with other classmates and their peers, which is great for building a classroom of critical thinking learners. So when I talk about this, I said we're going to look at these soft skills, or these core learning skills that are important to build each one of these components. So let's look at those for critical thinking. Critical thinking involves investigating issues that are not always, clearly defined and have no clear-cut answers. So by asking significant questions or exploring different solutions, critical thinking helps students, evaluate those ideas, add value to them by identifying the reasonable answers. And there's some core specific learning skills which are imperative for students to develop when they're developing their critical thinking, which is analyzing, reasoning, evaluating, problem solving, and decision making. And so these all come together to build those soft skills. You can start looking at this as early as, elementary and KG, helping students to be decision makers, helping them to problem solve throughout disciplines in math and science, in their language arts class. And then as they move on, helping them to develop additional skills like logical thinking and reasoning, such as those comparison, being able to classify things or sequence, cause and effect relationships, to be able to make analogies is very important. And those deductive and inductive reasoning skills, which help them to make hypotheses. So one of the things I always like to share, how do you do this in the classroom? Many teachers always ask, how do I get students, especially my English language learners, to engage in critical thinking or to ask questions? So one strategy you may want to use is the Bloom's taxonomy question frames. And I used to love to use this in my classrooms, and teachers would actually have these frames displayed all throughout their classroom. We used to call these, walls that talk, or interactive walls. And so, Bloom's taxonomy is divided into those lower order critical thinking questions, the knowledge, comprehension, and application. And then it's also, you go into those higher order critical thinking, the analysis and the synthesis and the evaluation. So our teachers used to have these Post-it, these questioning frames in their classroom, and they would pose these different styles of questions to students, remembering not to just stay on the knowledge or comprehension or application, but to always have a mix of types of questioning and move into those higher order thinking. This can also be done in an online setting. I've seen where teachers will, especially in the middle and high school, that they will have breakout sessions, and they may have students to go into a breakout session, into a small group, and ask them to develop, those level 5 Bloom's taxonomy questions. How powerful is that? To have your students to start to think about developing their own questions on a particular topic or learning objective. And then they would come back with the full group and they would have some discussion and dialogue in the question. So this is one great strategy to use to build critical thinking. Another strategies are these Socratic seminars, and I love this. You know, when you think about Socrates, or you think about, you know, during that time debate and those discussion and being able to dialogue back and forth through a debate style. This is Socratic seminars. And, you know, student support, they discuss those complex texts or those topics. They ask questions of one another about essential questions or selected tests. And additionally, Socratic seminars, you know, they develop both collaboration because students work together. They build this questioning and this critical thinking and dialogue, and they develop their communication skills as well. And even though I used to use this in my classroom setting in a more traditional classroom, I've also given you some ways that you can use this in an online setting as well. So you could use those breakout sessions through Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and students can go in those breakout sessions and they can still have these debate style question and dialogue. Another powerful tool that you can use in an online setting is have students to form groups and video record themselves using this debate style, formulating these questions, addressing issues and thought, which is such a great idea if you think of a social studies lesson. And some tools that you can use is Screencastify, which I love, and Emoto is another great tool. So these are just some ways that you can build critical thinking even in an online setting. Okay, so let's move to the next one. So as we're building critical thinking, we always need to think about how can we build innovation and creativity. And you know, creativity is all about bringing into being of something which does not exist before, either as a product, a process, or thought. And you know, it means looking at things from a different perspective. So encouraging students to be entrepreneurs and innovators as early as KG. You know, teaching students that they may not always come up with the right answer, allowing them to fail so that they can have those creative juices at play. You know, that ideas may not work the first time, so they have to always look at new ideas. And it's okay if we're really building creativity for our students. And one of the things that I really love when I talk about creativity, you know, to underpin students' creativity is important to know their learning styles, their interests, their abilities, how they learn, setting a classroom environment which allows for student choice. We want students to be innovators. If we want them to be creative, we need to allow for student choice to build creativity for learners. And I love going back to the research of Gardner, using Gardner's research, the multiple intelligence theory, as a way, a modality to look at student abilities and how they learn, to make sure the classrooms encompass varying learning styles. So remember, if you have students that are more mathematical or logical, you know, setting up ways that they can think conceptually or abstractly, you know, they build by logical or numerical patterns. Conversely, if you have a student that is more of a visual or spatial intelligence, allowing them to think about images or pictures, having a classroom that has those different modalities for learning. So I love the research from Gardner to really make sure that you're looking at those different learning styles for your classroom. And then those learning skills. So what are the core learning skills that we would like to develop for students? You know, that brainstorming builds creativity, involves developing those ideas, those thoughts and questions, even if they're far-fetched or impractical or impossible, but allowing students to brainstorm, a skill that every student should be able to use. Imagining ideas, you know, involves reaching into the unknown or the impossible. And Einstein was an exemplar of this ideology. And students should learn to use something in a novel way. So teaching them to use things in a novel way. This is great at the KG level as they're starting to explore, as they're starting to build their own process of thinking. You know, when you think about critical thinking, students should be a problem solver and actively engage in questioning to seek information. And this is done through that creative process. So having students to start this learning as early as KG, so by the time that they reach high school, they have true skills skills to be innovators, to problem solving, and to question actively. So let's move into that next skill, collaboration. So when we think about collaboration in the 21st century context, this requires the ability to work in teams, to learn from and contribute to the learning of others, to use their social networking skills. So our students use social networking, they use social media. This is how they collaborate. Bring this into your classroom. You know, teaching them how to use those same skills so that they can build empathy when working with their diverse peers, so that they can address problems, they can pitch solutions to decide the best course of action, all skills that will prepare them for career readiness. And let's look at these learning skills for collaboration. So teaching students how to allocate resources and responsibilities, ensures that all members of a team can work optimally. Assign those roles and tasks so that everyone's delegated and members should be expected to fulfill their parts in the task. Again, brainstorming. So teaching brainstorming at an early age to rapidly suggest and write down ideas without pausing to critique their ideas. And decision-making requires sorting through the many options provided and arriving at a single option to move forward. And to evaluate their process, to decide whether there's a clear sense of goals, for improvements, what their goal setting, to be able to analyze the situation, decide what outcomes are desired to achieve their objectives. These are all skills that students should start working on as early as KG, those early learners, so that when they're working collaboratively in groups, they have a clear sense of purpose and they have the learning skills to be able to do so as well. And communication. To me, especially when we're working with the diverse groups of learning, this is one of the most important skills. When we think about communication in the 21st century context, this refers not only to the ability to communicate effectively orally, but we're also talking about communicating in writing and with a variety of digital tools and listening skills. All of these build to make effective communicators. And then a classroom, which allows students not just to listen. So when I walk into classrooms, I want to hear students. I want to see them actively engaged and talking, and they're reflecting and they're communicating with teachers, with their peers. Mentors provides a whole new scope to the standards and their learning possibilities. So classrooms should be actively engaged. You should hear students. They should be communicating and they're writing through digital tools. And students communicate daily by texting and social media. So in our high school classrooms, allowing for these different modes, using these, having students to create blogs, to be communicators using social norms that they're already familiar with. And this helps them to build on their social communication as well. And this is just a powerful quote that I have here by John Dewey that talks about how important communication is in everyday life. So let's look at those core learning skills. So as early as kindergarten, it's imperative that students start to develop skills which will make them effective communicators in a global society. So, teachers working with early learners, especially our English language learners, they should use instructional strategies which provide explicit modeling and teaching and turn taking, speaking, active listening, reading, and using technology. So as students move into elementary, these learning skills continue to develop and they will be effectively to analyze and process communication, and so that students are then able to analyze situations and choose a medium for their conversation. You see how these skills build on each other, okay? And all to build so that students are effective communicators for a 21st century environment. And let's focus again, because many of us joining today, we work with English language learners, okay? So we know that communication is often difficult for our English language learners who often do not have the language skills to communicate effectively in English. So it's imperative that we start as early to ensure that our classrooms are immersed in both conversational and academic language to make student effective communicators. So, I put some strategies here to always remember to decrease that teacher talk and allow more opportunities for question and dialogue. Explicit vocabulary instruction. So every single classroom, when you're working with English language learners, they should have explicit vocabulary instruction. Allowing students to record and video themselves so that they can hear themselves, whether this independently or working with their peers or a small group, so that they can hear their dialogue with their peers. And the use of language frames, which I think is an important strategy when you're working with English language learners, using these sentence starters or question stems. And I want to show you an example of that. So, research-based method for assisting English language learners, students with disabilities, or just learners who may struggle with written or verbal expression, or these language frames. There's scaffolded support for students, and they help students to build internal templates for their expressive language. And it's not a crutch. And when I say internal templates, it kind of puts a foothold for students so that they understand and they are building their vocabulary. And, it provides that foothold in conversation and structure responding to questions. For students who don't have the words to respond back, it provides so that teachers aren't looking at, just the words or their ability to summarize, but they're helping to really scaffold to make sure that they understand the concept. So here's some quick language frames that you could use in your classroom. You can use this on an online setting to help students to state an opinion, or to ask a question, or to explain or elaborate in the question. So this is just a great strategy that you can use in your classroom. So let's look at some more strategies. I've given you those learning skills, those core learning skills for collaboration, for communication, for critical thinking, and for creativity. Let's look at how this looks in a blended model classroom. So digital tools are also important, especially as our students are learning online. And I've kind of broken these digital tools into two areas, so process tools and content knowledge. And I know some of you have used some of these, and you may be thinking, and you can write in the chat to other participants, and you just may be thinking of other digital tools that you may have used. But I've put some of the ones that I've seen in classrooms. When I talk about process tools, this is how students demonstrate their understanding of the process of the learning objective, that you can check throughout the lesson to see if students are understanding those concepts or key terms within the lesson. So some that you can use are Animoto, that students can videotape themselves. I love Pear Deck, which is a great tool to use, and it provides real-time feedback where teachers can embed in their lesson or their lesson plans or their PowerPoints, questions or dialogue, so students can respond back. It's a great tool for students to build their critical thinking and collaboration skills within a lesson. So a great tool. And the Jamboard, high school students love this one, where you can have some of those authentic jam sessions, I like to call them, where students are engaged in collaboration and communication, and they're critically thinking and using digital tools to be able to share out their learning in the classroom. And then we have those content knowledge tools, which really show at the end of the lesson, or you can use these in the middle of a lesson as well, whether or not students understand the content. So I've put some like Kahoot, Quizlet, quizzes, and clickers. So these are all digital tools that help to build critical thinking, creativity, where students can create their own lessons, as well as build collaboration and communication. And here's just another example of how to use the strategy that I shared beforehand by using some of our resources. So this is from National Geographic Science. I love this resource, which allows students to think like a scientist. So again, building that creative critical thinking, inquiry-based learning. Students are thinking like a scientist by conducting their own investigation, by analyzing their results and asking questions. So this is a great tool when you're thinking about inquiry-based learning. Allow students to think like a scientist to build their innovation and creativity and critical thinking. And then I've added the language frames for those scaffolds to help students to provide the language to be able to answer and ask questions. And then in an online learning session, I've had some teachers to share some things that they have found that works. I always like, remember, this is a professional learning community, so I always like to share out from teachers who are working in the field. So some teachers at the high school level have shared that they actually have students to create podcasts, TED Talks, online debates, kind of that Socratic seminar, and create new products and advertise online. And then to build communication and critical thinking, teachers have shared that they've done virtual field trips. There was a group that here in Dubai that they actually visited Yellowstone Park in the United States through a virtual means, and the students were able to talk to a real park ranger, and from there they were engaged in questioning and dialogue, and then students created their own project on natural resources. So a great way to expand and have students to think critically and collaborate. And then those open-ended projects, you know, that project-based learning to build creativity and critical thinking, and then using those digital tools so that students working together in groups. So I have a special guest with me, and this is an expert in the field, and I have Miss Miriam with me, and she is a science coordinator in a school here in Dubai, and I've had the pleasure of working with Miss Miriam, and Miss Miriam just really exudes in her classroom the 4 C's, and she's just going to share with you her journey working with the 4 C's and how she has built collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and creativity within a science class. So Miss Miriam, thank you for joining me today.
Good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Miss
Good
Miriam.
evening, Ms. DaVida.
Thank you, and I really appreciate you joining me, and I'm going to turn it over to you so you can talk about your experience with the 4 C's.
Thank you so much. So I'm Miss Mariam, and I've been teaching science in Dubai for 6 years following the next generation standards. And today I'll be sharing with you my journeys with 4 C's in elementary, middle, and high school. I'll start with the first part. So when I was a homeroom teacher, I've noticed the sense of creativity in every single student in my classroom. Most of my students were expressing their thoughts and activities indirectly through different creative ways. And I still remember my students when they created the phases of the moon as an example in science classes using cookies and sequenced them in the correct order. They were also in math classes, they were using simple materials to model the mathematical symbols, like modeling greater than and smaller than using pasta sticks. For communication, it's very important as students us to be able to effectively analyze and process the overwhelming amount of communication in their lives today, taking into consideration of English additional language, high level of vocabulary. Here are some strategies for communication in classroom. So it can be through think, pair, share strategy, like turn and talk to your partner about the objectives of the lesson. Team activity to discuss and plan ideas about their designs. Peer feedback, observation, like using 3 stars and 1 wish from the teacher. Use the breakout room on Microsoft Teams or Zoom and different online platforms. Doing presentation online or in classes, especially in innovation classes. Use the progress check or exit ticket like 3-2-1 strategy, and the use of icebreakers and essential questions. Also for communication, here is an example. As you see, grade 1 students were able to explain the parts of plant to their classmates using the scientific terminologies. Another example for communication, through the online platform, my students in grade 8 shared an experiment about electrostatic force through digital platform. The experiment was about electrostatic force. She modeled the effect of positive and negative charged particles on the balloon using a tap of water. Another example for collaboration, as you see, elementary students collaborated together to investigate the concept of shadow. Also, they were able to cross-curricular with mathematical skills by measuring the length of shadow and compare it with their classmates. For collaboration also in middle school and high school, grade 8 students were hardly worked as group to model examples of constellation. They used simple materials like canvas, lights, or even marshmallow and toothpick to model groups of stars. For creativity, and here I will highlight on the importance of creativity in classroom. Number one, all teachers and students should be prepared with the materials. They can use recyclable materials, and they have to make sure to share it with their students through the online platform or the weekly plan. For innovation and investigation, it's very important to challenge our students, find different solutions for a certain problem. Projects in the classes are highly important, and especially during classwork and not homework. So let's assign project as a classwork. Following the engineering design process and scientific methods are highly important scientific skills, and we can integrate them in our lessons and concepts. The use of imagination, innovation, create something new or implement a new idea in order to use it or change any device or appliance. And I will highlight here also on this, I will highlight here also on this code, it's very important to not being afraid to fail because we learn from our failures. Example of creativity, grade 1 student in elementary, they were able to find out or create a device, which is the telephone cup, in order to communicate over distance. Another example for creativity in middle school, our students were able to innovate a help desk. This desk, they use it for multi-purposes, like a school bag and a desk in the school. For critical thinking, I always use high order questioning like why, and I relate it to the context of the lesson. Why are you about a specific topic? And for STEAM questions, use of Bloom's taxonomy. It's very important to develop skills such as higher level of concentration and abilities. Let's motivate our students to think outside of the box by using limited resources and focusing on the criteria and the constraints of the design. I would like to share with you also some ideas of engagement during online classes. I used to use these ideas. They helped me a lot in order to engage my students. And engagement, it's a very important teaching strategy after the warm-up of the lesson. Every single teacher is very creative to find out an engaging activity in order to attract the attention of the student. So I used to take the attentions of my students using descriptive presentation. So with instruction, in case any member of the team cannot hear due to some technical issue, setting visual time limit like stopwatch and online timer, range of teaching tools to hook the learners through videos, pictures, scenarios, stories, scientific word problems, and so on. Range of questioning, and I used to modify here also the questions by giving hints to the student. In elementary, I used to use lollipop stick names of the student that allows team students to answer. Allow opportunity for sharing work. They can share on the screen or they can turn on their camera to show me their work. Assigning challenging scientific word problem, including chili task and the free choices. Students were so excited to choose from the free choices task according to their ability and to their learning styles. Also, graphic organizers are very important in the classroom, in addition to the video response sheet. In my next slide here, I have attached the ideas of engagement. Like as you see in the first one, we can use the following graphic organizer in the science journal in case of any experiment or STEAM activity. So the student will write down their prediction before conducting the experiment, what are the materials or the resources that they will use. So we don't guide them, they will find out by themselves, and then they will describe or write down their experiment. Here is the video response sheet. As you see, while our students are watching a short clip, they will write down fact about the concept, or they will write some scientific terminology with their meaning. Also, example of starter, which is in the form of graphic organizer, we can include the learning outcome, the starter question. Also, we can put here some reflection or progress of the lesson with challenging task. Thank you, Ms. DaVida.
Thank you, Ms. Miriam. Thank you for sharing all of the wealth of knowledge and what your teachers have been able to do at your school. I really enjoy seeing, some of those young learners that they are becoming innovators. I have loved making the help desk, which is a great tool to really show critical thinking, to be able to develop the innovation and the creativity. So just thank you for sharing all of those. Let's just look at and put everything back together that we discussed today. So we discussed that critical thinking teaches students to question claims and seek truth, and that creativity teaches students to think in a way that's unique to them. And collaboration teaches students that groups can create something bigger and better than you can on your own. So being able to work in those groups. And communication teaches students how to efficiently convey their ideas, whether it's in writing, whether it's using digital tools, or whether it's orally and through listening, which is very important. And combined, when we think about this, the 4 C's empower students to become 21st century learners, which is so important as we prepare students for post-secondary education. Students will foster learning skills, or those soft skills that we discussed throughout this session, which will fuel their innovation and their entrepreneurship and social and global awareness, so that they're prepared for the 21st century. And that's what our teaching practices should be about. This is how our classrooms should look. Our classrooms should be engaging. Students should be active participants, so that they're building these skills and so that they're prepared for 21st century skills. So thank you for joining me. Let's just evaluate our journey. And I love to do these 3, 2, 1s. Miriam shared these as well. But in the Q&A, just be thinking about what you've learned today. 3 strategies that you'll be able to take back to your classroom, and 2 thoughts that you're still thinking about that you may want to clarify that you can share back with me. And then 1 question or something else that you would maybe want us to expand on through future sessions. So if you can just put those in the Q&A, this will help us as we're looking at our session for today, how to better inform you for future professional development opportunities as well. So thank you. I see people already, writing in the chat and using those Q&As. And as you're doing that, as we're closing up, I want you to remember that we will have another session. So remember, next week we'll continue our virtual journey together, and we will take flight as we look at building independent learners through gradual release of responsibility. This will be on next Tuesday, March the 9th. So please join us. And then I'm also sharing just the full series with you again. So we have every Tuesday in the month of March. You can join me on this great learning opportunity as we really look at embracing change and just current trends in education, how to inform our teaching practices, how to make sure that we're using strategies that will make students active learning and to make them global thinkers and be prepared for 21st century learning skills. So thank you for joining me again. I'm looking at all of the questions that are in the Q&A. I look forward to spending time with you next week as well as we continue our journey. And thank you, and have a wonderful evening.